The meeting invite landed in my inbox at 9:14 on a Monday morning. All hands presentation, boardroom A, 4th floor. Mandatory attendance. Presenter, Cassandra Voss, Chief Marketing Officer. The campaign she was presenting was mine. Every slide, every headline, every strategic framework, every consumer insight, every media allocation model. 6 months of my life, distilled into a 40-slide deck that had my fingerprints on every single page. I know this because I built it. And I know she was presenting it as her own because she had sent me a calendar block the Friday before, marked private, with a single line in the notes field. Please do not attend Monday's board presentation. Your presence will create confusion around ownership of the work. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I forwarded it to my personal email, closed my laptop, and spent the weekend doing something I had been quietly preparing for since February. My name is Simone. I am 44 years old, and for 10 years I was senior marketing strategist at Callaway Consumer Group, a mid-sized consumer packaged goods company based in Atlanta, Georgia. We made household products, cleaning supplies, personal care lines, a small but profitable home fragrance division, the kind of brands that don't make headlines but move serious volume at serious retailers. Target, Kroger, Costco. The brands people reach for without thinking, which means the brands that have to work twice as hard to make people reach for them in the first place. That was my job, making people reach. In 10 years, I had led 4 major brand repositioning campaigns. The most recent, before the one that started all of this, had increased our home fragrance line's market share by 14% in 18 months and generated $6.1 million in incremental retail revenue. I had built the Callaway Consumer Insight Engine, a proprietary research framework that synthesized retail scan data, social listening, and focus group outputs into a single strategic brief. Before I built it, our campaign briefs took 6 weeks to produce. After, they took 9 days. The difference had saved the company an estimated $800,000 in agency fees over 3 years because we were no longer paying outside consultants to do the research we could now do ourselves. I had also built the Callaway Brand Architecture, a governance document that defined how every product line related to every other product line, what each brand was allowed to say and not say, and how the portfolio should be positioned against competitors. It was the document every agency we worked with received on day one. It was the document that kept our messaging consistent across 14 product lines and 4 retail channels. It was, in the words of our previous CMO, the thing that keeps us from looking like 4 different companies. Our previous CMO had retired in January. She had been at Callaway for 16 years. She had hired me. She had, in her last week, pulled me into her office and said, "You should be doing my job, Simone." I had thanked her and said nothing else. 2 weeks later, Cassandra Voss arrived. Cassandra was 31 years old. She was the daughter of Warren Voss, Callaway's CEO and founder, who had built the company from a single cleaning product in 1987 into a $340 million consumer goods business, and who had, apparently, decided that the best person to lead marketing strategy for that business was someone who had spent the previous 4 years doing brand consulting for a boutique firm in Nashville that specialized in restaurant and hospitality clients. Restaurant and hospitality. We made dish soap. She arrived on a Tuesday in a blazer that was clearly expensive and slightly too structured for our office, which ran business casual on a good day. She had a leather portfolio that she carried to every meeting for the first 2 weeks and never opened. She introduced herself to the team with a slide deck about her vision for the brand, which contained the phrase authentic consumer resonance 4 times and defined it differently each time. Our brand manager, a sharp and quietly furious woman named Kezia Oduya, who had been at Callaway for 6 years and had the particular gift of saying exactly what she meant in the fewest possible words, came to my office after that first meeting and closed the door. She said, "Authentic consumer resonance," Kezia said. I heard. 4 times. I counted. Kezia sat down. "What does it mean?" "I don't think it means anything. Is she going to be our boss?" "She already is." Kezia looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said, Okay, in the tone of someone who has decided to reserve judgment while privately having already formed a very firm one. The first real sign of trouble came in week 3. Cassandra called a strategy session for the full marketing team. She had been given access to the Callaway Consumer Insight Engine, the research framework I had built, and she wanted to walk through the latest data. She pulled up the dashboard on the conference room screen and began explaining what she was looking at. She called it the Consumer Sentiment Aggregator. That is not what it is called. It has never been called that. It is called the Callaway Consumer Insight Engine, and that name is on the login screen, the documentation, and the quarterly report that goes to the executive team. I said nothing. She continued. She pointed to the Brand Health Index, a metric I had designed and calibrated over 2 years, and said, "This is showing us our brand equity velocity." Brand equity velocity. Our media planner, a careful and precise man named Derek Sato, who had been with us for 4 years and communicated primarily through very small facial expressions, looked at me across the table. I looked at my notebook. "The velocity is trending positive," Cassandra said, "which means we have a window to accelerate our market penetration cadence." Derek wrote something on his notepad and turned it slightly so I could see it. It said, "Penetration cadence?" I did not respond. I wrote my own note and kept it to myself. After the meeting, Cassandra stopped me in the hallway. "Simone, I want to leverage your institutional knowledge on the rebranding initiative." "Of course. I'm thinking we position it as a full portfolio refresh. New visual identity, new messaging architecture, new retail strategy. The whole thing. That's a significant scope. It needs to be significant. Dad, the CEO, wants something that makes a statement." "Dad." She said it without hesitation. In a hallway conversation about a $340 million company's brand strategy. "Dad, I can put together a strategic framework," I said. "Great. I'll need a first draft by end of next week." She walked away. I stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds. Then I went back to my office and started building the thing that would eventually be presented to the board as Cassandra Voss's work. The project was called the Callaway Renewal Initiative. It was the most comprehensive brand strategy one had ever built. 6 months of work. 47 drafts. Consumer research across 8 markets. Retail partner interviews. Competitive analysis covering 11 direct competitors. A media allocation model that distributed an $8 million campaign budget across digital, in-store, and broadcast channels with projected ROI at each level. Every draft was saved to my personal cloud storage. Timestamped. Version controlled. With my name in the document properties of every single file. I want to be clear about something. I did not do this because I suspected Cassandra from the beginning. I did it because I have always done it. 10 years of building things for other people's companies had taught me that the work you create is the only professional asset that is entirely yours, and that the only way to protect it is to document it as you go. Not defensively. Just carefully. The way you document anything that matters. By March, Cassandra had stopped attending our weekly working sessions. She would send comments on drafts, vague, often contradictory, occasionally using terminology that suggested she had not read the section she was commenting on, but she was no longer in the room when the actual thinking happened. In April, she stopped sending comments. In May, she asked me to send her the final presentation deck in an editable format. I sent it. I also saved a copy of the email, the timestamp, and the version number of the file I had sent. In June, she sent me the calendar block for the board presentation. "Please do not attend Monday's board presentation. Your presence will create confusion around ownership of the work." I read it 3 times. Then I spent the weekend finishing what I had started in February. What Cassandra did not know, what she could not have known, because she had never asked and I had never volunteered it, was the full extent of what I had documented. Not just the drafts. Not just the version history. The entire development record. Every working session had been conducted over a shared project management platform that logged every comment, every edit, every file upload, and every timestamp automatically. My name was on 94% of the activity in that project log. Cassandra's name was on 3%. The remaining 3% was Kezia and Derek, who had contributed research and media data respectively. I had exported that log in February, when Cassandra had first started becoming scarce in our working sessions. Not because I knew what was coming, because I recognized the pattern of someone who was going to need to claim credit for something they hadn't built, and I had been in this industry long enough to know that the time to document your work is before you need the documentation, not after. I also had something else. In March, I had sent Cassandra a formal project update email, as I did every 2 weeks, summarizing the work completed, the decisions made, and the strategic rationale behind each one. Those emails were detailed. They were specific. They contained the exact language that would later appear in the board presentation, because I had written both. I had sent 22 of those emails over 6 months. She had replied to 4 of them. Each reply was a variation of "looks good, keep going." Looks good, keep going. That is not the reply of someone who is co-creating a strategy. That is the reply of someone who is waiting for the strategy to be finished so they can put their name on it. I had printed all 22 emails on Saturday morning. I had also printed the project log export, the version history from my personal cloud, and the document properties from the final presentation file, which showed the author name, the creation date, and the complete edit history. I put all of it in a folder. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Nwosu who specialized in employment and intellectual property law and who had the useful quality of being very calm about things that were not calm. "Walk me through what you have," she said. I walked her through it. She was quiet for a moment. "This is thorough. I know. You have authorship documentation, a project activity log, and a chain of emails showing you as the sole strategic contributor over 6 months." "Yes. And she's presenting it to the board tomorrow as her own work." "Yes. Do you want to stop the presentation or respond after?" I thought about that. Stopping the presentation meant a confrontation in real time, in a room full of people, with Warren Voss sitting at the head of the table. It meant chaos before the evidence had been reviewed. It meant Cassandra's first instinct would be to deny, and her father's first instinct would be to protect her, and the board's first instinct would be to manage the situation rather than evaluate it. After I said, "Who's the board chair?" "A woman named Eleanor Marsh. She's been on the board for 9 years. She came up through brand management at Procter & Gamble." Patricia paused. "She'll understand what she's looking at. That's why I'm sending it to her." "When?" "During the presentation." Patricia was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "That's precise." "I know. Send me the folder contents tonight. I want to review before you send anything." I sent her the folder at 9:30 p.m. She called back at 11:15. "Send it," she said. "Everything you have. Cover letter, documentation package, the email chain. All of it. To Eleanor Marsh directly?" "To Eleanor Marsh directly. Her board email is public record." "I know. Simone." Her voice was careful. "Once you send this, it moves fast." "I know that too. Are you ready?" I looked at the folder on my kitchen table. 6 months of work. 47 drafts. 22 emails. A project log with 94% of the activity under my name. "I've been ready since February," I said. "The board presentation started at 10 a.m. on Monday. I know this because I was in the building. I had come in at my normal time, sat at my desk, and worked on the Q3 media planning document that Derek and I had been developing. I was not in boardroom A. I was 2 floors below it, at my desk, with my laptop open and a cup of coffee that had gone cold because I had forgotten to drink it. At 10:07 a.m., I sent the email to Eleanor Marsh. The subject line was, "Regarding the Callaway Renewal Initiative, documentation of authorship." The body was 4 sentences. It identified me, described the documentation attached, noted that the presentation currently being delivered to the board had been developed entirely by me over a 6-month period, and stated that I was available to discuss the matter at her convenience. The attachments were the complete documentation package. 41 pages. Then I went back to the Q3 media planning document and kept working. Kezia appeared in my doorway at 10:52. She looked at me for a moment. "Did you do something?" I sent an email. "To who?" "Eleanor Marsh." Kezia's eyes went very still. "The board chair." "Yes." She looked at the ceiling. Then back at me. "During the presentation." "Yes." She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay," in a completely different tone than the one she had used in January. This one contained something that sounded like relief. "Go back to your desk," I said, "and document your morning." She nodded once and left. At 11:34, my desk phone rang. The display showed an internal extension I didn't recognize. "Simone Achebe," I said. "Ms. Achebe, this is Carol from the executive suite. Eleanor Marsh would like to meet with you at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Conference Room Pinnacle, 4th floor." Conference Room Pinnacle was the board's private meeting room, not Boardroom A, where the presentation had been. The smaller one, with the glass walls and the view of Midtown Atlanta and the particular quality of silence that rooms with very good soundproofing have. "I'll be there," I said. I hung up, finished my coffee. It was cold. I drank it anyway. At 11:47, my cell phone rang. A number I recognized. Cassandra. I let it ring. She called again at 12:03 and at 12:31. The third call at 12:31 was followed immediately by a text message. The text said, "Simone, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the presentation, and I'd really like to connect before your meeting this afternoon to align on the narrative around the campaign development process." Align on the narrative. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Patricia Nwosu and put my phone face down on my desk. Derek appeared in my doorway at 1:15. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has been watching a situation develop from a careful distance and has decided it is safe to acknowledge it. "The presentation ended early," he said. "How early?" "About 40 minutes early. The presentation had been scheduled for 90 minutes. "How did it end?" I asked. Derek said, "Eleanor Marsh asked Cassandra to walk her through the development timeline for the consumer research framework. Specifically, who had conducted the focus groups in the Southeast markets." I waited. Cassandra said the research had been developed collaboratively by the marketing team. And Eleanor Marsh asked her to name the team members who had contributed. Derek looked at me steadily. "She named you first." "Of course she did." Then Eleanor Marsh said she had some questions she'd like to follow up on separately and thanked everyone for their time. That is the sentence that ends a presentation 40 minutes early. Not anger. Not accusation. Just a polite, precise, irrevocable pause dressed up as courtesy. "Derek," I said. "Yeah. Document your morning. Everything you observed. Dates, times, what was said." He nodded. "Already started." Then he went back to his desk, and I went back to mine, and at 1:55 I picked up my folder and took the elevator to the 4th floor. The glass walls of Conference Room Pinnacle looked out over Midtown Atlanta in the particular flat light of a Monday afternoon in June. Eleanor Marsh was already seated when I arrived. She was 63 years old, with the precise posture of someone who had spent 4 decades in rooms where posture communicated something. She had a copy of my documentation package on the table in front of her. She had been reading it. I could tell because the pages were not in the same order I had sent them. She looked up when I came in. "Ms. Achebe," she said. "Sit down." I sat. She looked at the documentation package for a moment. Then at me. "Walk me through the development timeline," she said. "From the beginning." I walked her through it. Methodically. Every phase, every decision point, every draft. I referenced the version history, the project log, the email chain. I did not editorialize. I did not characterize Cassandra's behavior or assign motive. I presented the documentation the way I presented everything, in the order it happened, with the evidence attached. Eleanor Marsh listened without interrupting. She asked 3 questions, all of them precise, all of them about specific dates and specific documents. I answered all 3 without hesitation. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been at Callaway?" 10 years. "And in those 10 years, has anything like this happened before?" "No." She looked at the documentation package again. "This is thorough work, Ms. Achebe. The campaign and the documentation." "Thank you. I have some calls to make this afternoon." She stood. "I'll be in touch." I stood. "I appreciate your time." She looked at me for one more second. "No, thank you for yours." I took the elevator back down to my floor. Sat at my desk. opened the Q3 media planning document. Derek walked past my office at 3:30 and said, without stopping, Cassandra left the building at 2:45. I said nothing. Kezia appeared at 4:15 and said, Warren Voss has been in his office with the door closed since noon. I said nothing. At 5:02, my cell phone rang. Patricia Nwosu. Eleanor Marsh called me, she said. When? 20 minutes ago. She wanted to confirm the documentation was authentic and that you had legal counsel. What did you tell her? That it was and you did. And? Patricia paused. She said the board would be convening an emergency session tomorrow morning. An emergency board session. For a consumer goods company in Atlanta on a Tuesday in June. Patricia, I said. Yes. What does that mean? She said, it means Eleanor Marsh read 41 pages of documentation in 3 hours and decided it couldn't wait until the next scheduled board meeting. I looked at my desk. The cold coffee. The Q3 media planning document. The folder that had been sitting on my kitchen table since Saturday morning. Okay, I said. Simone. Her voice was careful. Tomorrow is going to move fast. I know. Are you ready? Outside my window, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does at 5 in the afternoon in June. Traffic. Heat. The particular quality of light that comes just before the sky decides what it's going to do next. I've been ready since February, I said. The emergency board session was called for 9 a.m. Tuesday. I know this because Patricia called me at 7:15 to confirm it, and because Eleanor Marsh had sent me a formal written request to be available by phone starting at 10 o'clock, which meant the board intended to act before they spoke to me, which meant they had already seen enough in 41 pages to know what direction they were moving. I made coffee, answered 3 emails, waited. Patricia called at 9:52. It's done, she said. Tell me. The board convened at 9. Eleanor Marsh presented the documentation package. Warren Voss was in the room. A pause. He did not dispute the findings. I said nothing. Cassandra's CMO title has been rescinded effective immediately. She's been placed on administrative leave pending a full review of her tenure. Administrative leave. Not fired. Not yet. But the title was gone, and in a company where the title had been the entire point, the title being gone was the thing that mattered. What about the campaign? I asked. That's why Eleanor wants to talk to you at 10. Eleanor called at 10:03. Her voice was the same as it had been in conference room Pinnacle. Measured. Precise. The voice of someone who has made a decision and is now executing it without drama. Ms. Achebe, she said. The board has reviewed your documentation and taken action regarding Ms. Voss's role. I want to discuss the Callaway Renewal Initiative and your continued involvement. I'm listening. We'd like you to lead the campaign. Formally. With the title and compensation that reflects that responsibility. I appreciate that, I said. I'd like to discuss the specifics with my attorney before I respond. A pause. Of course. Can we reconvene this afternoon? 3 o'clock works. 3 o'clock, she said. Conference room Pinnacle. I hung up and called Patricia. They want me to lead the campaign, I said. I know. Eleanor called me before she called you. What did she say? That the board wants this resolved cleanly and quickly, and that you are the only person who can deliver the campaign on the timeline that's already been committed to the retail partners. The retail partners. Target. Kroger. Costco. 3 major retailers who had been briefed on the Callaway Renewal Initiative's launch timeline and had allocated shelf space and promotional windows based on it. A campaign delay wasn't just an internal problem. It was a contractual one. Patricia, I said. What's my number? She said, what do you want? I told her. She was quiet for a moment. The equity component is going to surprise them. Good. The title is going to require board approval. I know. That's why Eleanor is the one making the call. She said, give me until 2. She called back at 1:45 with a term sheet. I read it. Made 2 changes. Sent it back. She confirmed at 2:30. I walked into conference room Pinnacle at 3 o'clock with my folder and Patricia's term sheet and the particular composure of someone who has been waiting for this conversation since February. Eleanor Marsh was there. The general counsel, a careful man named Robert Finch who I had interacted with twice in 10 years and who communicated primarily through very precise written language. And Sandra Voss, the board's lead independent director, who had joined Callaway's board 3 years earlier from a background in consumer brand investment and who had the quality of someone who understood exactly what a $8 million campaign meant to a $340 million company's growth trajectory. Warren Voss was not in the room. That told me everything I needed to know about how the board had decided to handle the next hour. I sat down, placed the term sheet on the table. Before we discuss the campaign, I said, we need to agree on terms. Eleanor nodded. Go ahead. Chief Marketing Officer. Permanent role, reporting directly to the board's brand committee, not through the CEO's office. Robert Finch wrote something. Base salary of $310,000. That's just over 2 times my previous base. Signing bonus of $60,000. Equity participation at 0.6% over a 3-year vesting schedule. Sandra looked at the term sheet. The equity is unusual at this level. The situation is unusual, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she wrote something. Full creative and strategic authority over the Callaway Renewal Initiative and all subsequent brand campaigns. No executive overrides without board-level approval. No external consultants brought in to review or modify campaign strategy without my written consent. Eleanor said, that's a significant structural provision. Yes, she nodded. Kezia Oduya is promoted to Brand Strategy Director with a 22% salary increase and a written acknowledgement that her contributions to the Callaway Renewal Initiative were material and documented. Robert looked up. The acknowledgement is a formal document? Yes. Signed by the board chair. He wrote, Derek Sato is promoted to Senior Media Strategist with an 18% salary increase and the same written acknowledgement. And I said, a formal incident report. Complete timeline. Every decision, every date, every document. What was presented to the board on Monday, who presented it, and what the documentation shows about authorship. Preserved in company records. The room went still. Robert Finch said, carefully, that creates some complexity around the Voss family's relationship with the company. I understand. Warren Voss is still the CEO. I know. A formal report of this nature, entered into company records, is accurate, I said. And accuracy is not negotiable. Robert looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Sandra. The kind of exchange that takes 4 seconds and contains an entire conversation. Then Eleanor said, if we agree to all of it, how quickly can you have the campaign ready for the retail launch window? The campaign is already ready, I said. It has been ready since May. What it needs is a CMO to present it. Sandra made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. It was the sound of someone who has just understood the full geometry of a situation. Eleanor said, Robert, draft the agreement. He was already writing. I walked out of conference room Pinnacle at 4:47 p.m. with a signed term sheet and a start date of the following Monday. I did not call anyone. I drove home, made dinner, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. But I need to tell you what happened in the 2 weeks between Eleanor's call and that conference room, because the story of how Cassandra Voss spent those 2 weeks is the part that explains why the board moved as fast as they did. By the end of the second week after the board session, Callaway Consumer Group had a problem that had moved well past the 4th floor. The administrative leave had been announced internally as a leadership transition, which is the corporate communications language for something happened that we are not going to fully explain, and we would appreciate it if you did not ask. The marketing team had been told that campaign leadership was under review. The retail partners had been told nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Cassandra, in the 48 hours between the board session and her administrative leave taking effect, had made 2 phone calls that she should not have made. The first was to the marketing director at Target's Consumer Goods Division, a woman named Lori Hendricks who had been Callaway's primary retail contact for 4 years and who had a very specific and well-documented relationship with the Callaway Renewal Initiative's launch timeline. Cassandra had called her to, in Cassandra's words, get ahead of any narrative confusion around the campaign transition. Lori Hendricks had been in retail marketing for 19 years. She knew what narrative confusion meant. She asked Cassandra directly whether the campaign strategy and creative direction were still intact. Cassandra said they were working through some internal alignment issues. Lori Hendricks asked whether the launch timeline was still on track. Cassandra said they were optimizing the delivery architecture. Lori Hendricks said, "I'm going to need a call with whoever is actually running this campaign by end of week." Then she called Sandra Osei directly. Sandra Osei was on Callaway's board. Lori Hendricks had her number because they had served on the same industry advisory panel 2 years earlier. It was the kind of connection that exists in every industry and that people forget about until the moment it becomes relevant. Sandra called Eleanor. Eleanor called Robert Finch. Robert Finch sent Cassandra a formal notice that she was not to contact retail partners or external stakeholders during her administrative leave. That was the relational failure. The financial failure came 3 days later. Callaway's Q2 earnings preview had been scheduled to include a forward-looking statement about the renewal initiative's projected impact on second-half revenue. The CFO, a methodical man named Arthur Gaines who had been at Callaway for 12 years and communicated exclusively in numbers, had built that projection around the campaign's confirmed retail placement windows. Target had committed to a front-of-aisle display program worth an estimated $2.3 million in incremental exposure. Kroger had committed to a digital circular feature. Costco had committed to a seasonal end cap. All 3 commitments were contingent on the campaign launching on schedule. When Lori Hendricks called Sandra Osei, she had also, in the same conversation, mentioned that Target was reviewing its commitment pending clarification of campaign leadership. Arthur Gaines found out about this on a Thursday morning. He called Eleanor Marsh at 8:30 a.m. "The Target commitment is at risk," he said. "I know. That's $2.3 million in projected exposure. If they pull the display program, the Q2 forward guidance is wrong." "I know, Arthur." Eleanor, who is running the campaign. She said, "We're finalizing that today." He said, "I need a name by noon." She had a name by noon. It was mine. And by 1 p.m., Patricia had confirmed the term sheet was ready for my review. The third failure was the one that accelerated everything. Cassandra, in the same 48-hour window before her leave took effect, had also sent an email to the agency Callaway had retained for the campaign's production work. A boutique creative studio in Atlanta called Meridian and Park, which had been briefed on the campaign strategy in April and had been developing production assets based on the strategic framework I had built. The email instructed them to pause all production work pending a strategic realignment of the campaign's creative direction. Meridian and Park had a contract. The contract had a kill fee clause. Pausing production without a formal contract amendment triggered a review period, and the review period triggered a notification to their legal team, and their legal team sent a letter to Callaway's general counsel within 24 hours. Robert Finch received that letter on a Wednesday morning. He called Eleanor Marsh. Eleanor called Patricia Nwosu. "Patricia called me. They need you in that room today," Patricia said. "I know. The agency is threatening to invoke the kill fee. That's $340,000. "I know. Tell Eleanor I'll be there at 3. That was the afternoon of conference room pinnacle. That was why Robert Finch was in the room. That was why Sandra Osei was there. That was why Warren Voss was not. The board had spent 2 weeks watching a $8 million campaign, 3 retail commitments, a $2.3 million exposure window, and a $340,000 agency contract all move toward the edge simultaneously. And they had arrived at the only conclusion the math supported. They needed me. Not a version of me. Not a consulting arrangement. Not a 60-day engagement. Me, with the title and the authority and the documentation that proved the work was mine in the first place. I walked into that room knowing all of it. I walked out with everything I had asked for. The following Monday, I arrived at Callaway Consumer Group at 8 a.m. Not through the side entrance. Through the main lobby, past the reception desk, past the framed brand campaigns on the wall, including 2 that I had built, past the security desk where the morning guard looked up and said, "Good morning, Ms. Achebe," with the particular warmth of someone who has been watching a situation and is glad it resolved the way it did. The 4th floor was different than it had been 2 weeks earlier. Not dramatically. Just the specific quality of a space where the tension has been replaced by something that isn't quite relief yet, but is moving in that direction. Kezia was at her desk. She saw me before I reached her. She stood up. And then she did something I had never seen Kezia do in 6 years of working together. She smiled. Not the small, contained smile she used in meetings. A real one. The kind that takes over a face before the person decides whether to allow it. CMO, she said. Director, I said. She sat back down and opened her laptop. I pulled the agency's status report this morning. Meridian and Park confirmed they're back on schedule. Production resumes Wednesday. Good. What's the target timeline? Lori Hendricks confirmed the display commitment is reinstated. She wants a call Thursday to review the final creative. Set it up. Derek appeared from around the corner. He had the expression of someone who had been waiting to say something and had decided this was the moment. The Kroger circular feature is confirmed, he said. They moved the window by 1 week to accommodate the production delay. Net impact is minimal. Good work, Derek. He nodded once. Then he went back to his desk and started working, which is the highest compliment Derek Sato knows how to give. I sat down at my desk. My new desk, in the corner office that had been Cassandra's for 6 months, and that now had my name on the door in the small placard that facilities had installed over the weekend. I opened my laptop, pulled up the Callaway Renewal Initiative master file. Everything was exactly where I had left it. Of course it was. I had built it. 7 months later, Callaway Consumer Group looked like a company that had made a very expensive mistake and decided to become better because of it. The Callaway Renewal Initiative launched in September. All 3 retail placements executed on schedule. The Target front-of-aisle display program ran for 8 weeks and drove a 19% lift in velocity for the home fragrance line during the launch period. The Kroger digital circular feature generated 2.1 million impressions in the first 2 weeks. The Costco seasonal end cap sold through at 94% by the end of the program window. Total campaign attributed revenue in the first quarter post-launch, $11.2 million, against an $8 million investment. The board had projected a 1.2x return in year 1. We delivered 1.4x in the first 90 days. Arthur Gaines sent me an email after the Q3 numbers came in. It was 4 sentences. The last one said, "This is the best campaign ROI we've seen in 11 years. I thanked him and kept my expression neutral. Kezia was brand strategy director. She had rebuilt the campaign briefing process from the ground up, creating a new protocol that required documented strategic rationale for every creative decision, with version history and authorship tracking built into the workflow from day 1. She called it the Callaway Creative Record. It was, in structure and philosophy, almost identical to the personal documentation system I had been using for 10 years. She had figured that out on her own. I did not comment on it. Some things don't need commentary. Derek was senior media strategist. He had developed a new media mix model that integrated real-time retail scan data with our social listening outputs, which meant we could now adjust media allocation mid-campaign based on actual velocity data rather than projected performance. He had presented it to the board's brand committee in October. Sandra Ose had asked him 3 questions, all of them precise, all of them about methodology. He had answered all 3 without hesitation. After the meeting, he came to my office and said, "She's sharp." "She is," I said. "I like presenting to people who actually read the materials." "Get used to it," I said. "That's how it works now." The Callaway brand authorship policy was implemented in August. It was a formal governance document, approved by the board, that established clear protocols for documenting creative and strategic contributions across all marketing projects. Every campaign brief, every strategic framework, every creative concept required documented authorship, version history, and a sign-off chain that made clear who had built what and when. It was the policy that should have existed before any of this happened. It existed now because of what happened when it didn't. Cassandra Voss was still at Callaway. Not as CMO. Not in any role that touched brand strategy, creative direction, or external stakeholder relationships. She had returned from administrative leave in August as Director of Brand Partnerships, a role that Warren Voss had created for her that had a narrow scope, no authority over campaign strategy, and a reporting line that went through me. Through me. I want to be precise about what that meant in practice. It meant that every significant decision in her role required my sign-off. It meant that she attended my team's weekly strategy sessions as an observer, not a contributor. It meant that she had spent 7 months learning, slowly and with visible discomfort, the difference between understanding a strategy and building one. She was professional. She was punctual. She asked questions before making decisions, which is the minimum viable improvement and also, for some people, the hardest one. I did not need her to be destroyed. I needed the work to be protected. Those are different things, and the difference matters, because a company where the wrong people are humiliated is not better than a company where the wrong people are empowered. It is just a different kind of dysfunction. The formal incident report had been completed in July and entered into the board record. It documented the full timeline, every draft, every timestamp, every email, every project log entry. It documented what had been presented to the board on that Monday in June and what the documentation showed about who had built it. It documented the financial impact of the 2-week disruption, the agency kill fee review, the target commitment uncertainty, the Q2 guidance adjustment, the production delay costs. Total financial impact, $4.7 million. That number included the direct costs, the opportunity costs, and the cost of my first 2 weeks back, which had been billed at the consulting rate Patricia and I had discussed before the permanent agreement was signed. The report did not editorialize. It did not assign moral weight. It listed decisions, dates, costs, and outcomes in the same flat, precise language that good documentation always uses. Warren Voss had read it. I know this because Eleanor Marsh told me he had asked for a copy before the board meeting where it was formally entered into the record, and that he had arrived at that meeting without his usual prepared remarks. He had not commented on the consulting rate line item. Some numbers speak for themselves. My life outside the building was better in ways I had not fully anticipated. I took a long weekend in October. 4 days. My phone was on, because I am who I am, but I checked it twice a day instead of continuously, which for me is the equivalent of a full digital detox. My sister, who had been listening to me describe Callaway's internal politics for 10 years with the patient attention of someone who loves you and does not entirely understand your industry, called me on the second day and said, "You sound different." Different how? She thought about it. Like you're not carrying something. I had been carrying something for 10 years. Not resentment. Not ambition. Just the specific weight of someone who has built things that other people take credit for and has decided, quietly and without drama, that the solution is not to stop building. The solution is to document everything and wait for the moment when the documentation matters. The moment had come. The documentation had mattered. I thought about that Monday morning in June sometimes. The meeting invite in my inbox at 9:14. All hands presentation. Boardroom A, 4th floor. Mandatory attendance. Presenter, Cassandra Voss, Chief Marketing Officer. The campaign she was presenting was mine. I had known it when I read the invite. I had known it when I read the calendar block she sent me Friday afternoon. Please do not attend Monday's board presentation. Your presence will create confusion around ownership of the work. I had forwarded that sentence to my personal email, closed my laptop, and spent the weekend finishing what I had started in February. That sentence was now in the formal incident report, entered into the board record, preserved in company files alongside 41 pages of documentation that told the complete story of who had built what and when. Cassandra had tried to create confusion around ownership of the work. What she had created instead was a paper trail. If you've ever been underestimated at work, I hope this story reminds you that quiet preparation always beats loud arrogance. If this resonated, like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And remember, the best thing you can do for your career is document your work like someone is going to try to take it, because one day, someone will.